I want you to think about gravity. It is the most fundamental force of our existence, the invisible anchor that tethers us to the world. It is constant, impartial, and utterly relentless. We live our entire lives in its embrace, so accustomed to its pull that we barely notice it. Our muscles, our bones, our very sense of self are all calibrated to its unwavering presence. For us, gravity is stability. It is order. It is home. Now, I want you to imagine a situation where this fundamental force, this constant companion, is turned against you. Imagine it is re-engineered, focused, and transformed from a gentle, universal embrace into an instrument of excruciating, intimate pain. Imagine a device so fiendishly simple that its only moving part is you. A device that uses the very weight of your own body, the substance of your own being, to tear you apart. Picture a crude wooden structure, something you might see in a carpenter's workshop or a stable. It's an A-frame like a sawhorse, but the flat top has been replaced with a sharp, vertical wedge of wood, honed to an unforgiving angle, like the spine of some grotesque beast. Sometimes this spine is smooth. Other times, it's deliberately left rough, studded with splinters, or even inlaid with sharp pieces of metal. This is the apparatus. There are no cranks, no gears, no complex mechanisms of torment. There is only this stark, angular shape. The victim is stripped naked, their hands bound. They are lifted, hoisted up by several men, and then lowered, straddling this sharp wooden wedge. Their feet dangle in the air, unable to touch the ground. And then they are released. In that moment, gravity ceases to be a friend. It becomes the executioner. The victim's entire body weight, every pound of flesh and bone and blood, is now concentrated onto the razor-thin line of the wooden spine, driving it deep into the most sensitive part of their body, the perineum, the delicate flesh of the groin and crotch. The pain is not a sudden shock. It is a slow, grinding, and overwhelming crescendo. It is a pain that radiates upwards through the torso and downwards through the legs, a white-hot line of agony splitting the body in two. And there is no escape. To struggle is to make it worse. To shift your weight is to cause the wedge to tear and grind. The only thing to do is to endure, as your own physical self becomes the engine of your own destruction. This device has many names. In France, it was the chevalet, the little horse. In English, it was often called the wooden horse. But history has given it its most famous and infamous name, a name that conjures images of dark dungeons and fanatical inquisitors. The Spanish donkey. Today, we will mount this terrible instrument, not in body, but in mind. We will explore one of history's most brutal and psychologically devastating forms of punishment. We will discover how its profound simplicity made it a favorite not just of the notorious Spanish Inquisition, but of military commanders and civil magistrates across Europe and the Americas for centuries. We will dissect the mechanics of its pain, analyze its role as a tool of public humiliation, and unravel the historical mystery of how this brutal workhorse of military discipline became forever branded with the name of Spain. This is the story of the Spanish donkey, a journey into a world where justice was a spectator sport, and the most agonizing torment came not from an external force, but from the simple, terrible weight of being human. To understand the Spanish donkey, we must first dispel the myth that its name implies. While it is forever linked in the popular imagination with the dark-robed figures of the Spanish Inquisition, its origins and primary use lie elsewhere. This was not a creature born in the secretive dungeons of Toledo or Seville. Its true home was the military barracks, the regimental parade ground, the deck of a naval warship. The Spanish donkey or wooden horse was, first and foremost, an instrument of military discipline. Its design is so brutally simple that it was likely invented and reinvented multiple times across different cultures. The concept of forcing someone to straddle an uncomfortable object as punishment is probably as old as armies themselves. But its formalized use as the wooden horse seems to have gained prominence in Europe during the 16th and 17th centuries, an era of near-constant warfare, from the 30 Years' War that ravaged Central Europe to the countless conflicts between burgeoning nation-states. In this period, armies were not the professional, drilled forces we know today. They were often motley collections of mercenaries, conscripts, and criminals, held together by a thread of loyalty and a thick cord of brutal discipline. Desertion was rampant, insubordination was common, and petty theft could cripple a unit's morale and effectiveness. Commanders needed ways to enforce order that were cheap, effective, and, most importantly, highly visible. This is where the wooden horse excelled. It required nothing more than a few planks of wood and a carpenter. Could be built anywhere, in any camp. It was a portable symbol of authority. The punishment it delivered was not hidden away. It was a public performance, a piece of theater designed for an audience of soldiers. A soldier accused of a crime, perhaps falling asleep on watch, stealing rations, or showing cowardice in the face of the enemy, would be sentenced to ride the horse. The entire regiment would be assembled to watch. The victim would be stripped, a deliberate act of humiliation that robbed them of their uniform and, with it, their identity as a soldier. They would be hoisted onto the sharp spine of the donkey. And then the true ingenuity of the device came into play. To prevent the victim from using their hands to support their weight, their hands were often tied behind their back. But the real torture came from the weights. To increase the agony, heavy weights, often muskets, cannonballs, or sacks of rocks, were tied to the victim's ankles. Let's pause and consider the physics of this. The pressure exerted by the wooden wedge is a function of force divided by area. The force is the victim's body weight. The area is the tiny sliver of flesh in contact with the sharp wood. By adding weights to the feet, the force component of this equation was dramatically increased. A 150-pound man could suddenly be exerting 200 or 250 pounds of force onto that narrow, agonizing point of contact. The pain would be multiplied exponentially. The duration of the punishment varied according to the severity of the crime. Could be an hour for a minor offense. For more serious infractions, a soldier might be left on the horse for an entire day, or even multiple days, taken down only for brief periods to prevent them from dying of exposure or dehydration. Let's dissect the specific forms of pain this would inflict. First, there is the immediate, overwhelming pain in the groin and perineum. The sharp wood would dig into the flesh, causing severe bruising, lacerations, and crushing injuries to the soft tissues. The pressure on the pudendal nerve, a major nerve in the pelvic region, would cause searing, radiating pain. For male victims, the damage to the scrotum and testicles would be catastrophic. The long-term consequences could include permanent nerve damage, impotence, and incontinence. Second, there is the muscular agony. The body would instinctively try to relieve the pressure, leading to intense and constant straining of the leg, back, and abdominal muscles. After hours in this position, the victim's entire body would be locked in a cramp of pure agony. Third, there is the damage to the bones. The immense pressure could, over time, cause fractures to the pelvic bone or the coccyx, the tailbone. The very structure of the body would begin to fail under its own weight. And finally, there is the public humiliation. This cannot be overstated. To be stripped naked, exposed, and left to suffer in front of one's comrades was a profound psychological assault. The jeers and taunts of the crowd, the visible spectacle of one's own powerlessness, was as much a part of the punishment as the physical pain. It was a way of making an example, of saying to every soldier watching, "This is what happens when you break the rules. This is what happens when you challenge authority. You will be reduced to a piece of screaming, helpless meat." This practice was not confined to Europe. It traveled across the Atlantic with colonial armies. There are well-documented cases of the wooden horse being used during the American Revolutionary War by both the British and, to a lesser extent, the Continental Army. A soldier in Washington's army might be punished for desertion by being forced to ride the horse, a visceral reminder of the price of disloyalty. This military context is key. The Spanish donkey was not primarily a tool for extracting confessions, like the rack or the heretic's fork. Its main purpose was punitive and deterrent. It was a sermon on the importance of order, written in the language of agony and shame. It was a brutal but effective tool for controlling unruly men in a brutal world. But the question remains, if this was a common military punishment across Europe, how did it get stuck with the name Spanish donkey? To answer that, we have to look at another parallel history, the history of propaganda. The story of how the wooden horse became the Spanish donkey is a fascinating lesson in historical branding, propaganda, and the power of a good villain. To understand it, we need to talk about a phenomenon known as the Black Legend, or La Leyenda Negra. Starting in the 16th century, Spain was the dominant power in Europe. It had a vast global empire, fueled by the gold and silver of the Americas, and it was the staunchest defender of the Catholic faith in a Europe being torn apart by the Protestant Reformation. For its rivals, primarily Protestant nations like England and the Netherlands, Spain was the great enemy, the evil empire of its day. To undermine Spanish power, these rival nations engaged in a long-term, systematic propaganda campaign. They published pamphlets, books, and lurid engravings that depicted the Spanish as uniquely cruel, bigoted, depraved, and fanatical. This campaign, the Black Legend, focused on two main areas: the brutal Spanish conquest of the Americas and the terrifying secret police of the Catholic Church, the Spanish Inquisition. The Inquisition was a perfect target. It was secretive, powerful, and its use of torture to enforce religious dogma was a gift to propagandists. Protestant writers, many of whom had fled the Inquisition themselves, wrote sensationalized accounts of its horrors. They described dungeons filled with diabolical machines and black-robed inquisitors who took sadistic glee in the suffering of their victims. It is in this context of anti-Spanish propaganda that the wooden horse likely received its new name. An English or Dutch propagandist, wanting to create a catalog of Spanish tortures, would have collected stories and images of various punishment devices. They would have known of the wooden horse from its use in their own armies. What better way to add it to the list of Spanish atrocities than to simply give it a Spanish name? Calling it the Spanish donkey or the Spanish horse immediately associated this common military punishment with the sinister reputation of the Inquisition. It was a brilliant piece of branding. The name was catchy, evocative, and it fit perfectly into the pre-existing narrative of Spanish cruelty. Engravings began to appear in popular books depicting the Spanish donkey being used in the dungeons of the Inquisition, often alongside the rack and the strappado. The image stuck. The myth was born. Now, does this mean the Spanish Inquisition never used a device like the Spanish donkey? It's not impossible. The Inquisition did use a wide variety of methods to encourage confessions, and a device that inflicted prolonged pain and humiliation would certainly fit their toolkit. There are some Spanish texts that refer to a punishment called the potro, which can mean colt or rack, and some have interpreted this as a reference to the donkey. However, compared to well-documented inquisitorial tortures like the garrucha, strappado, and the taca water cure, evidence for the widespread use of the donkey by the Inquisition is very thin. It was certainly not their signature instrument. The irony is that the propaganda was so successful that even today, the Spanish donkey is almost exclusively associated with the Inquisition in popular culture. It's a testament to the fact that history is often written by the victors, or at least by the side with the better printing presses. But the device's story doesn't end with military discipline and propaganda. It also found a place in the civil justice system, particularly during one of the darkest chapters of European history, the witch trials. During the height of the witch craze in the 16th and 17th centuries, accused witches, the vast majority of whom were women, were subjected to unimaginable tortures to force them to confess to consorting with the devil. The Spanish donkey was a particularly horrific tool to use on a female victim. The nature of the device, attacking the groin and pelvic region, made it not just a tool of pain but a profound act of sexualized violence and degradation. For a woman to be stripped naked, publicly displayed, and subjected to this specific form of torment was an act designed to shatter her dignity and humanity completely. It was a physical manifestation of the misogyny that underpinned much of the witch craze, a violent assault on the female body under the guise of legal procedure. The pain would have been immense, but the shame, in a society where female modesty was paramount, would have been a form of torture all its own. So, the Spanish donkey reveals itself to be a multifaceted beast. It was a tool of order in the anarchic world of the mercenary army. It was a piece of propaganda in the religious and political wars of the Reformation. And it was a weapon of misogynistic terror in the paranoid hysteria of the witch trials. Its power lay in its adaptability and its profound understanding of human psychology. It didn't just cause pain, it caused a specific kind of pain. It was a pain that came from within, a pain that was amplified by public shame, and a pain that lasted for an agonizingly long time. It was an instrument that didn't just break the body. It was designed to dismantle the soul. The victim, writhing in agony on that sharp wooden spine, was not just being punished for a crime. They were being taught a lesson about their own powerlessness in the face of an authority that could literally turn the weight of their own existence into a weapon against them. Like all the instruments of public, spectacular punishment, the Spanish donkey eventually rode off into the sunset of history. Its decline was not due to a single event, but to a gradual and profound shift in the Western world's conception of justice, punishment, and human dignity. The world that had made the donkey a centerpiece of its justice system slowly disappeared. The Enlightenment of the 18th century played a crucial role. Thinkers like Cesare Beccaria and Voltaire, whom we've met before in our explorations, powerfully argued against torture and cruel and unusual punishments. They advocated for a justice system based on reason, proportionality, and the protection of individual rights. The idea of stripping a person naked and torturing them in the public square for the entertainment and edification of a crowd began to seem not just cruel, but irrational and barbaric, the relic of a less civilized age. Armies also began to change. The rise of professional, nationalist armies with standardized training and a more formal code of military justice meant that discipline was no longer solely reliant on ad hoc, theatrical brutality. While military life remained harsh, punishments like flogging became more common, seen as a more efficient way to inflict pain without permanently disabling a valuable soldier, which the donkey could easily do. The wooden horse was retired, deemed too crude and too damaging for a modern fighting force. By the 19th century, it had almost entirely vanished from use. Today, the Spanish donkey exists only as a museum piece, a grim curiosity from a past we are glad to have left behind. It sits in collections of torture instruments, its simple wooden form still radiating a palpable sense of menace. It has become a symbol, along with the Iron Maiden, which was likely a complete fabrication, and the pair of anguish of the supposed barbarity of the Dark Ages. But is its story truly over? Or does the principle behind the Spanish donkey live on in other forms? The core concept of the device is the use of the body's own weight and the force of gravity to inflict prolonged pain and distress. This is a principle that has not been forgotten. When we look at modern reports of torture and enhanced interrogation, we find eerie echoes of the donkey's logic. The use of so-called stress positions is a direct descendant. Forcing a detainee to hold a painful, unnatural posture for hours or days on end, whether it's crouching, standing on tiptoes with arms outstretched, or being forced into a small box operates on the exact same principle as the wooden horse. It uses the body's own weight and muscle fatigue as the mechanism of torture. It is a pain that builds over time, a pain that leaves few visible marks, and a pain designed to grind down a person's physical and psychological resistance until they break. It is the Spanish donkey, stripped of its wooden frame and distilled to its pure, physical essence. The legacy of the Spanish donkey also lies in its role as a tool of public humiliation. While we no longer place wooden horses in our town squares, the desire to publicly shame and degrade those who transgress our social norms has not disappeared. It has simply migrated into the digital realm. The modern stocks are social media platforms, where online mobs can descend upon a designated target, stripping them of their reputation, their career, and their privacy. The punishment is psychological rather than physical, but the intento make a public example. To enforce conformity through shame carries a faint but unmistakable echo of the crowd jeering at the poor soul writhing on the wooden horse. The Spanish donkey, then, is more than just a historical artifact. It is a masterclass in the engineering of pain from the simplest of materials. It is a story about how history gets written and how names can become powerful weapons of propaganda. But most of all, it is a chilling reminder of a fundamental truth about power. One of the most effective ways to control a person is to convince them that their own body is their enemy. When we look at that simple A-frame with its sharp wooden spine, we are looking at a profound statement about the nature of authority and suffering. It tells us that the most terrifying machines are not always the most complex. It shows us that for centuries, justice was not something hidden behind closed doors, but a brutal performance played out for all to see. And it forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that the force that holds our world together, the gentle and constant pull of gravity, can, with a small bit of cruel ingenuity, be transformed into the sharpest and most personal of weapons. Thank you for taking this uncomfortable ride with me into the history of the Spanish donkey. Uncovering the stories behind these instruments is not about reveling in cruelty, but about understanding the complex forces of history, psychology, and power that have shaped our world. If you found this exploration of bodyweight torture, military discipline, and historical propaganda to be a valuable journey, please consider showing your support for the channel. You can do that by liking this video, subscribing for more deep dives into the shadows of history, and hitting the notification bell so you're always here for the next story. And now, as always, I want to turn the conversation over to you. The name Spanish donkey is a powerful piece of historical branding. Can you think of other examples where an event or object's popular name shapes our understanding of it, perhaps inaccurately? And what does the simplicity of this device tell you about the nature of cruelty? Please share your thoughts, questions, and ideas for future topics in the comments section below. Your insights are what bring this history to life. Thank you for listening.